Hi, I'm Nick Haig, and I'm the host of the World's Greatest Business Thinkers podcast. Today, I'm joined by Paul, and we're going to talk today about branding and brand frameworks. Paul, everybody is familiar with brands. Let's start by, in your words, defining what a brand is.
Thank you, Nick. Well, both you and I are very passionate about brands. Everybody is a brand expert. At least they think they're a brand expert because they know what a brand is. It's the name of a product. They probably would also mention things like logo or certain colours and packaging that they'd expect the brand to have. So people are familiar with what brands are, both as consumers but also as marketeers. And brands are critically important. The reason that we're passionate and excited about them is that we know that people buy a product or a service, they buy an offer that a company makes, but actually they buy much more than that. They buy the reputation that's attached to that product or that service. And that reputation matters a lot to people. If you imagined that we were driving down a road, we were short of fuel in our car, and there's a roundabout with a petrol station on one side, which has a brand that we're familiar with, and a petrol station on the other side, which is selling petrol, but we've never heard of that brand. They're both the same price. It's a commodity product. Which do you think we'd choose? Well, I know what the answer is. Unless this brand, which is known, has a terrible reputation, you have some reason for not buying it, the chances are you will go for the one that you know. So brands make buying a comfort for people, because they've either heard of it or they've tasted it or somebody's told them about it and they know something about that product, which attracts them to go for it in preference to the product that isn't known. So brands are critical in making a purchase decision. So a brand is something that we would hope somebody would choose to the exclusion of anything else based on its reputation. And we can propose from that or hope from that that it will build loyalty, that people will repeatedly go back and buy that and possibly pay a premium for it because they're buying something beyond the product or service.
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of definitions of brand, isn't there? I like a promise delivered. Brand promise is a commitment made by that company to its customers, outlines the values, the experience they can expect when they're using the products or services. But it serves as this foundation, I think, for this brand identity. And why I like it is because it ties in this customer experience. So again, we like branding. We're advocates of customer experience, written books on it too. So it ties in this customer experience, which is so important in delivering that brand experience too.
I think a point there that you made, Nick, about a brand is a promise delivered, is who makes the promise? You sort of imagine that we as the manufacturer of the product or the service are in control of this product or service and we make the promise. Actually, it might be a promise that sits in the mind of the customer, an expectation that they have created. And so, a classic example, we'll talk about it maybe further, about Coca-Cola, how for years and years and years, people have said, drink Coke, it's the real thing, it was the first one. And people would have an expectation, a promise that it is the real thing, the original. And if you then launch a new product and say, well, actually, although we thought that was the real thing and we wanted you to buy it, we've now got another better one, suddenly people might have dissonance and think, well, hang on, you've told us for years and years and years that this is the best. Is it going to be better or not? And we know when Coke launched its new product, lots and lots of customers have got this promise in their mind of a traditional product that they'd bought for years, a classic product they bought for years and years and years, and they stopped buying Coke. So we must never forget that promise might also be constructed in people's own minds as well as from the promotions and the way that we present our brand.
Yeah. We just talked about Coca-Cola there. I'm interested in to what extent brands vary importance between different industries. And by that, I mean to extent the importance in a basic, maybe business to business company compared to one that's selling consumer products.
Well, yes, I think when we first said we're going to talk about brands, people might think about the logos and brands that we might see on the apparel that we wear or the products that we buy in a store, in a supermarket. And they are extremely important there. We walk around the supermarket hardly thinking about what we want and just picking up our regular brands that have become friends, if you like, that we put into our trolley. In a business-to-business sense, a lot of companies are selling commodity products. They're made to a specification which almost any other company could make who is a competitor of those products. So you would imagine, therefore, that there would be there'd be less importance of the brand. You and I know, Nick, from the research that we've done, it's even more important in these situations because the product might be the same, made to the specification, but we go back to the point that they're not just buying the product, they're buying the fact that it is going to be delivered on time, in full, every time it's asked for. If there is a problem technically, it will get sorted out by the supplier. So the brand in this case, in the B2B case, isn't so much the product itself, but it's the name of the supplier, the reputation of the company that's selling the product. And it becomes extremely important. And by extremely important, I mean, not only does it cause loyalty, where we know that people buying business-to-business industrial products very often have bought those products for years. I mean, like 10, 15 years they've been buying from the same company. Even though somebody's knocking on their door saying, I can supply that to you and I can supply it cheaper, they can often get a premium for it. So in B2B markets, branding is just as important, if not more so.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, just leaning into a few of those things you mentioned there, it's about building that reputation and it's about instilling that trust, isn't it? Creating that solid relationship that you've got. And I think that's often because you've got multiple decision makers in the company, that are making that decision. So your marketing efforts, need to be targeted across that whole different DMU that's making the decision. And it's important within the marketing aspect to specifically around the brand, when you're trying to build trust and deliver that value, that, that customer journey is not that one single event. So it's this continuous process that you've got to stay on top of in delivering against, what people are looking for from the brand, from the purchase.
And that word trust is critical in our discussion about brand, because trust is built up from being confident that you're going to get the same thing time after time after time. And repetition is absolutely critical when branding. So when branding, it always has to be, things have to be the same. The logo has to be the same. The type style has to be the same. The product mustn't vary. Your promise has to always be the same so that people begin to expect and trust that this is what they will get delivered. We've got to remember where the word brand came from. It was that hot seared mark that was from, that was onto the rump of cattle in the States to distinguish them from anybody else's cattle that was out there on the range. Always the same mark, enabling you to be able to find your product, your cattle, from the competition. And that's what we need out of a brand. We need constant, the repetition of the same promise every time so that people trust it. Yeah.
And finally, I think it's worthwhile pointing out that, building that solid B2B brand it's an asset for sure, but it's not just an asset. It becomes this competitive advantage in today's demanding business environment, doesn't it? It allows you to not only stand out from the competition as we're talking here with the distinctive assets, but allows you to charge more for your product as well, and gain an advantage in that sense.
And remember this, that if a company, a B2B company or any company builds a strong brand, when that company is bought, the company that's buying it isn't buying the machine. Well, they are buying the machinery and the factory where it's made. But the premium that they're paying for that machinery in the factory is the brand. That those customers that are regularly buying from that supplier will also buy from us. Now we bought the company, which means that there's a huge premium. If you build up your brand, you're not only able to get a price premium for it, but the company itself will be worth significantly more.
Yeah. What do you think then is the biggest problem that people face when dealing with brands?
Wow. Well, Well, there may be a couple of problems. One problem is, of course, especially this can happen, marketeers are guilty of this, and probably business to business or industrial marketeers can be more guilty than anybody else. And that is that they don't distinguish between products and brands. So a marketeer likes to make their name by launching yet another brand. And a brand has to be supported. It has to be distinctive and different and be seen to be. A promise has to be made. And this isn't done for free. It's done over a long time, and it's also done with quite a cost in terms of promotion. And so one of the problems that you have with branding is that brands get created and they're not really brands. They're just a product they're not supported by the promotion. And you and I, again, as researchers have known, we work for companies. One that we worked for and is well known, the Henkel brand, because it had grown through acquisition over many years. The Henkel company, German company, owned many brands, and they reduced these many brands to a handful or a couple of handfuls of core brands, and were more successful in doing so because those core brands could then be highly supported rather than just sitting there without the support. So one of the problems with branding is that people just create a brand and really they just created a product. I think the second problem with branding is that people don't understand how to build a brand. This developing the consistency of the brand. What are its values? How are you going to create a distinctive value for this brand and communicate it to your audience in such a way that they think they're buying something special and they fully understand what that special thing is that they're getting? So people can say, well, we've got a product here or a brand here and it's got 10 different attributes. That's far too many attributes for a brand. A brand has to stand for not just everything, but something, a small number of things. And we might talk about the brand bullseye, but that helps you get to that brand essence, that core value of the brand. And so I think another problem with branding is that people try and build in too many values to the brand rather than thinking through what that brand really stands for, what makes it distinctive.
Yeah. There's a really interesting podcast episode with a professor of marketing and branding, Mats Georgeson, who's Swedish, and he was a professor at Stockholm University. But he talks about that in one of the podcasts. And I think, to that point, making it successful in building a brand, it's hard to achieve sometimes integrated marketing communications or breakthrough marketing without employees knowing about the vision and caring about it. So you've got to build your brand internally and externally. And if that brand vision lacks a higher purpose, maybe people won't be inspired. And the challenge might be impossible if you don't get your team involved within that brand, as well as then starting to market it externally. Is there a framework we should be aware of for measuring the health of a brand within a company?
Yes, a company should regularly measure the health of the brand. So we call this a brand audit. And you need to, in a brand audit, what would you audit? What do you think is important to measure about the brand? Well, we would say that the first thing that's really important is awareness. Measure the awareness of how many people have heard of the brand. If they haven't heard of your brand, it really doesn't exist on the shelf space of their minds. So that's number one in terms of the audit. Number two is you might want to determine its position. Does it stand out as being different and distinctive from the other brands that are out there in the market? Because if it doesn't, you haven't really got a strong brand, and that position can be measurable. And then you talked about the promise delivered. So I think the third thing that you'd want to measure is, does it actually live up to expectations? Does it deliver against that promise? And all these are scores that you could be asking your customers and potential customers, to what extent does it deliver these things? And then I suppose the final thing is everything aligned? We talked about consistency. And if, for example, a brand decided that it wanted to be green, sustainable, and yet the vehicles that delivered it spewed out lots of diesel smoke, or the packaging was just excessive on the product that was supposed to be green. It's not aligned with its core value. So these four things, which are awareness and position and delivery and alignment, are pretty critical in terms of doing a brand audit. So that's something that everybody should be thinking about measuring when they're looking at their brands, and making sure that one or other of those isn't letting the brand down.
Yeah. And over the 25 years of myself being in business and carrying out branding research, then, we've called that a brand audit. Sometimes we called it a brand health wheel, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
When we're looking at usage and awareness, we're looking at brand positioning, we're looking at delivery. They're the three different spokes of the wheel. And then if you look at that for other brands in the marketplace, that gives you a benchmark of how you compare and contrast with competitors, and therefore also look at the underbelly of their weaknesses or your strengths and how you can play to those in pushing your brand forward. One of the most popular frameworks on the website is the Bullseye, the branding Bullseye for building a brand. Can you talk us through how this works?
Yes, well, we've already said that an important requirement of a brand is to have something that it stands for, a brand mantra or a brand essence. Whatever that brand does in terms of talking to customers in the market, it communicates this critical thing. So how do we get to this critical thing? And the framework called the brand Bullseye is like a darts board with in the center the bullseye. And if you were using that framework, you work from the outside inwards. You start by on the outside saying, what would this brand make me feel if I was a customer? What does this brand say about me if I buy this product? And if you get from your research, you get lots of answers to those questions, you might be able to then begin to develop a position of the brand. This is where my brand sits within the market. And you might be able to talk about a personality of the brand. If this brand was a person or an animal, what sort of animal person would it be? And you would, as you're doing this, you're getting closer and closer to that central point you're looking for, is what 2 or 3 words actually define this brand, say what it is. And you would have to have, I think, pieces of evidence that say we can demonstrate, if anybody asked, that our brand does deliver against this, whatever it is we pretend to be, the premium brand, the brand that lasts longer, the brand that's greener, the brand that's cheaper, whatever it may be. And everything, you need to have that evidence. So the brand Bullseye starts at the outside, collecting all the research about what it feels like to use the brand and buy the brand. And then it helps you develop the personality. And then it helps you the brand position. And finally, you get to that brand essence right in the center. And that brand essence is something which, whenever you do something for that brand, you develop packaging or you think about how you're going to promote it to the market, it should be at the front of your mind. So we go back to Coca-Cola, and I mean, we're not privy to what their brand essence is, but almost certainly it's something like the real thing, the original, because almost everything they've talked about in their promotion has been that everybody else has copied us. We were first, and everybody else has copied us. And of course, once you own that ground, that high ground, it's yours. And Coca-Cola own it. And Pepsi, of course, major competitor, can't compete with that. So what's their essence? What's their brand mantra? And they must have done something similar and decided that their brand mantra was going to be taste. You know, that's what makes us special and different. And the Pepsi Taste Challenge, and, they sort of proved, if you like, that everybody preferred their drink. And they came up with promotions, which I won't be able to repeat, but it was lip-smacking, thirst-quenching, whatever it was. And they would always be talking about taste in their promotion. So that a large, and by the way, these are black sticky liquids that are very difficult, unless you're a connoisseur, able to tell the difference between the two. And yet they have very distinctive positions within the market. And both Pepsi and Coke can charge a lot more than the own brand supermarket cola that you might buy.
Yeah.
So that brand Bullseye is very, very popular because it helps people get towards the brand essence.
Yeah. So we've talked about the brand audit, or the brand health wheel, sometimes it's called. We've got the branding bullseye. Other favourite frameworks that you can point us to on the website?
Well, there are over 20 different frameworks which will help you with branding. We're back now. Once we've got our brand position and our brand plan, we're back to implementation. So how do we launch this brand? How do we manage the implementation of it? Well, of course, actually, this framework is useful for lots of different things, but I quite like the SMART framework, which says that you've got to have objectives which are specific and measurable and actionable and realistic and timely, So a framework like that can help you in the implementation. But one that I think is useful is one that we developed within our company. We called it, from the acronym, MOSAIC. And MOSAIC stands for, the M is for mapping. So that's your situation analysis, find out what's going on in the market, where does our brand sit against the competition. The O in MOSAIC is for objectives, what's our objective for the brand, where's it going to be. The S is for strategy. How are we going to get to where we want to go against this objective? The A is for action, and the I is for implementation. And then the C at the end, the MOSAIC, is for controls. Something that we've talked about already, but this very important requirement to be able to be testing all the time that your brand, people are aware of the brand and it is aligned and it does deliver, and back to the audit, so you're controlling all the time. In case there is a weakness, you need to correct it.
Well, I think just, from this discussion we've had today, there's so much on branding. It's one of the most popular sites, those 20 frameworks that people are looking at to help them within their businesses. So if anyone wants more information, then go to b2bframeworks.com. There's lots more there, and we've just touched upon implementation, and that will be another topic that we'll touch on in another video. So hopefully, if that's of interest, then you can join us in that particular video too. Thanks for joining me today, Paul.
Thanks, Nick.